A single sentence turned 3 billionaires pale. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even spoken with anger. But the moment Julian Cross said the name Dr. Lionel Albright, the laughter in the foyer collapsed like glass under pressure. Only seconds earlier, the estate had been humming with power. Polished shoes echoed across marble floors. Low conversations about mergers and market caps drifted beneath crystal chandeliers. The elite of Montclair Heights had arrived expecting a celebration, an evening of contracts, champagne, and strategic alliances. Instead, they were about to witness a reckoning. Julian's estate stood on the northern cliffs overlooking the city, its limestone facade glowing under precision lighting. Built to reflect dominance, the property carried the quiet arrogance of permanent success. Every window burned gold against the darkening sky, every hedge trimmed to architectural perfection, every imported detail whispering control. Inside, the air carried the scent of gardenias and aged oak. Julian Cross had designed his life the way he designed his company: clean, disciplined, impenetrable. A self-made billionaire in logistics technology by 42. He was known less for charm and more for inevitability. He did not chase headlines. Headlines adjusted to him. He did not attend galas unless the outcome benefited his strategy. Tonight's event was surgical. The final signing phase of a merger that would double-cross Meridian Group's operational footprint across North America. The guest list included men who had once dismissed Julian as temporary, ambitious but unsustainable. Now, they waited for his approval as if it were oxygen. While the city's elite adjusted cufflinks and compared private jet routes, Denise Albright moved through the dining hall with controlled precision. Mid-40s. Unshakable posture. Calm eyes that missed nothing. Officially, she was head of domestic operations. Unofficially was the spine of the estate. For nearly 9 years, she had managed everything from staffing rotations to event orchestration with quiet authority. She arrived before sunrise that morning, reviewed the floral symmetry, corrected the angle of every place setting, tested lighting tones against skin undertones for photography, oversaw wine temperature calibrations. She did not rush. She did not demand attention. She executed. To the arriving guests, she would blend into the background. To Julian, she was foundational. The first black sedans rolled through the iron gates, gravel crunching like distant thunder. Julian greeted each guest personally. He remembered acquisition details, regulatory hurdles, even the subtle losses hidden behind public success. His handshake was firm, economical, his smile measured. Among the arrivals were 3 men who had known him before the skyscrapers and stock surges. Mason Hargrove, venture capitalist, confidence inherited alongside capital. Tyler Winslow, media magnate, perpetually aware of optics. Garrett Vale, real estate tycoon, charismatic in public, corrosive in private. They had watched Julian rise. They had applauded him publicly. They had resented him privately. Denise entered the foyer briefly to coordinate timing with the catering director. Her navy uniform was tailored and immaculate. A tablet rested in her hands, displaying dietary notes and service cues. Her presence was composed, almost architectural. The Mason noticed her first. His gaze lingered longer than courtesy required. "Julian," he said lightly, nodding toward Denise, "you really are committed to authenticity." Tyler followed with a thin smile. "There's something nostalgic about this place." Garrett leaned closer, voice lowered but sharp. The vintage elegance. Very on-brand soft laughter followed, controlled, intentional, designed to be deniable. Denise heard it. It was not new. The undertone. The assumption. The reduction wrapped in humor. She continued walking, giving a quiet instruction to a server about spacing between courses. But Garrett, emboldened by familiarity and the illusion of safety, raised his voice slightly. "You keep her for the aesthetic," he added. "Adds character." The comment lingered in the air longer than the laughter that followed. A few nearby guests shifted. Others pretended distraction. Denise stopped. She allowed silence to stretch, not defensively, but deliberately. Then she turned. Her shoulders remained squared, her chin lifted slightly. Her eyes met Garrett's with a steadiness that neither flared nor softened. She did not respond. She did not retreat. She simply held his gaze. And that was when Julian stepped into the foyer. He had heard enough. His expression did not erupt. It tightened. A subtle recalibration in posture. The kind that precedes consequence. What exactly? Julian asked calmly. Did you mean by that? The question was soft. It did not need volume. Garrett exhaled a short laugh. It was a joke. Explain it. Julian replied evenly. Mason attempted to smooth the moment. Julian? It's Alien's eyes did not leave Garrett. If it's harmless, he said. Clarify the humor. Tyler adjusted his cufflinks. No harm intended. Julian did not smile. He glanced toward Denise, not apologetically, not protectively, but knowingly. There was history in that glance, depth. Wade and eyes held the look for a fraction of a second. Then Julian turned back. Draw. Lionel Albright, he said quietly. The name cut through the room. Garrett's face drained of color. Mason's confidence fractured. Tyler inhaled sharply, composure slipping. Nearby conversations dimmed. Something in the air shifted from social to surgical. Julian's voice remained controlled. Since we're discussing preservation and character, he continued, perhaps we should acknowledge foundations. Garrett swallowed. Julian, this isn't necessary. It is, Julian said. You reference nostalgia? Let's reference memory. Mason's tone hardened. That was decades ago? And yet, Julian replied, its consequences are standing here. Denise felt every gaze begin to turn, not fully understanding, but sensing gravity. Tyler attempted deflection. We all made difficult decisions. Some of us survived, Julian said quietly, because someone else absorbed the collapse. Silence. Then Denise spoke, her voice steady, composed. Mr. Cross, the guests are ready to be seated. It was not a plea. It was control. Julian met her eyes. Something unspoken passed between them. History layered beneath professionalism. You're right, he said. For a moment, tension hovered, unresolved. Then Julian stepped closer to the three men. You should have left her out of it, he said quietly. Especially knowing whose name she carries. Garrett's composure cracked. You wouldn't. Julian's face returning toward his executive assistant near the staircase. He added calmly, ring the file from my study, the one dated March 17th. Mason's eyes widened. Tyler stiffened. Because March 17th was not just the date. It was the day Dietrich Lionel Albright signed documents that saved 3 collapsing empires and destroyed his own. The grand dining hall doors opened. Light spilled outward. Guests began moving toward their seats, unaware that the evening had shifted from celebration to exposure. Julian lingered one final second in the foyer. This conversation, he said softly, is no longer private. Then he walked toward the head of the table. Behind him, Mason, Tyler, and Garrett exchanged a look they had not shared in 25 years, a look of men who suddenly realized that the past they buried had just been placed at the center of the room. And somewhere upstairs, inside a sealed leather folder bearing Dr. Lionel Albright's signature, waited a truth that could dismantle everything they had built. The first course had not even been served. The name Julian Cross spoke was Dr. Lionel Albright. The impact was immediate and surgical, like a scalpel through velvet. The foyer had been filled with polished laughter and easy arrogance, but the sound died mid-breath. Mason Hargrove's smirk collapsed, as if it had been yanked off his face. Tyler Winslow's fingers froze on his cufflinks. Garrett Vale's expression emptied so fast it looked like fear had replaced his skin. A few guests, who didn't recognize the name, still felt what it did to the men who did. Power reads power. And the way 3 billionaires reacted to a single name told everyone the same thing. This wasn't a social misunderstanding. This was a buried history resurfacing in front of witnesses. 25 years earlier, Dr. Lionel Albright had been the kind of financial strategist that old money pretended to respect, brilliant, disciplined, quietly lethal with numbers. He wasn't flashy. He didn't chase attention. He didn't posture on magazine covers. But when Lionel Albright spoke, men with bigger titles listened anyway, because he was usually right. Back then, Mason, Tyler, and Garrett weren't untouchable. They were hungry, young, desperate to be taken seriously by institutions that liked their ambition but didn't trust their volatility. Lionel had. He'd mentored them. introduced them to rooms they didn't belong in yet, and taught them how to survive without selling their souls. He'd done the same for Julian Cross. Julian had been a 22-year-old founder with a logistics platform that no bank understood and no investor wanted to gamble on. Lionel saw the architecture beneath the chaos. He invested early, quietly, decisively, when everyone else told Julian to come back when it's proven. Julian never forgot that. Then Lionel died. Officially, it was a market collapse that destroyed his visible assets. Officially, the stress and scrutiny consumed him. Officially, it was the clean story that allowed everyone to move on without looking too closely. But Julian had never believed the official story. And in that foyer, under chandeliers and curated art, he let the weight of it settle until it pressed down on every expensive breath. Denise Albright stood near the staircase, posture steady, tablet still in her hands like armor. To the guests, she was staff. To Mason, Tyler, and Garrett, she was an inconvenience. To Julian, she was something else entirely, history walking on quiet feet. Because Denise wasn't just the woman they'd mocked with their vintage decor joke. She was Lionel Albright's widow. And before she was ever staff, she had been present at private dinners where men like Mason, Tyler, and Garrett came hungry for approval. She had been the quiet intelligence at Lionel's side, the one who noticed when numbers didn't add up, when contracts hid poison behind polite language. She had studied finance alongside Lionel. She had structured portfolios with him. She had corrected mistakes, subtle, surgical corrections, that saved these men fortunes they didn't even realize they had almost lost. But when Lionel died and the investigations began, the world didn't care what Denise knew. It only cared what it could seize. Mason had sent flowers. Tyler had issued a statement. Garrett had offered a handshake at the funeral and never called again. They publicly mourned. Privately, they protected themselves. Julian had been the only one who showed up at Denise's door when the legal storm tightened around her neck. He was broke again then, his startup barely breathing after the same collapse. But he came anyway. He sat in her living room while creditors called, while papers arrived with threats dressed as formality. He watched Denise sign documents that stripped her life down to survival. She sold the Albright estate to cover debts tied to guarantees Lionel had signed. That guarantees meant to stabilize the ventures of men who now stood in Julian's foyer with money in their voices and cruelty in their humor. Guarantees they never publicly acknowledged. Now Mason tried to stand taller, as if height could rewrite time. He said, smoothing his tone, "We all respected Lionel. We all owe him gratitude. This isn't..." Julian didn't respond right away. His silence was sharper than an argument. It forced Mason to keep talking, forced him to fill the space with whatever he could scavenge from his own conscience. Tyler's voice slipped in, careful and controlled. "This doesn't belong here. Tonight is about the merger. Investors are watching." Julian's eyes narrowed slightly. "They should watch." Garrett attempted a laugh, but it came out thin. "You're making this theatrical." Julian's gaze stayed locked. "You insulted her with an audience. I'm answering you with one." He turned slightly, letting the room hear him without raising his voice. "Lionel Albright guaranteed over $40 million in early commitments that kept your ventures alive when the market turned. That money didn't vanish. It shifted, and it shifted onto Denise. The air changed. Guests who had been drifting toward the dining hall slowed, drawn back by the gravity of what they were witnessing. Those guarantees," Julian continued, "were never repaid to his estate." Mason's mouth opened, then closed. "The paperwork, there were restructures, things got lost." "Convenient," Julian said, the word soft but crushing. Denise didn't move. But inside her, something tightened. Not anger, not surprise. A familiar ache. The kind that comes from realizing the room is finally seeing what she has carried alone for years. Julian's voice shifted just slightly, less corporate, more personal. Denise never demanded restitution. She rebuilt quietly. She worked because dignity sometimes requires survival before recognition. And because she refused to become what bitterness tries to make a person. The room absorbed that. Not as sentiment, but as indictment. Then Julian did something the guests didn't expect. He thanked her publicly. Not as staff, as a guardian of resilience. "You taught me patience," he said, looking at her with that layered history in his eyes. You taught me the difference between being powerful and being right." A tremor ran through the hierarchy of the room. In a single moment, Denise's position transformed, not because anyone granted her worth, but because Julian revealed it had always been there. Garrett, cornered by pride, tried one last defense. Lionel made choices. He took risks. He collapsed his own house. Julian's expression hardened. No, he was pushed. Tyler's eyes flicked up. "Julian, don't do this." Julian reached out his hand, not toward Denise, but toward his assistant, appearing at the staircase with a leather folder. The assistant hesitated, sensing the room's tension, then placed it into Julian's palm like it was heavier than paper. Julian didn't open it yet. He just held it, letting its presence speak. "I found archived documents during due diligence for this merger," he said. Documents showing manipulated risk exposure. Documents that didn't disappear in restructuring. Mason's throat worked as he swallowed. Julian's eyes cut to him. 3 signatures, he said calmly. On decisions made weeks before Lionel died. Denise's hands tightened behind her back. She kept her face composed, but the small contraction of her fingers betrayed what she refused to show. The guests understood now. They weren't watching a billionaire defend his employee. They were watching reputations balance on invisible scales. Julian's tone turned colder, more precise. "I didn't pursue legal action," he said. "I pursued timing. Because timing is power." He nodded toward the dining hall as staff waited, frozen between etiquette and reality. "Tonight's merger puts Cross Meridian Group in position to acquire significant shares in your companies," he told Mason, Tyler, and Garrett. "You should have considered that before you decided she was safe to insult." Julian stepped aside, signaling dinner would proceed. But no one moved easily. The polished floors no longer reflected prestige. They reflected anxiety. Denise resumed her duties because that's what dignity does. It keeps moving even when the world finally looks up. Yet, as she guided guests toward their seats, she noticed something she hadn't before. The folder in Julian's hand wasn't labeled with corporate dates. It was marked with a handwritten note in fading ink. A note in Lionel Albright's handwriting, and the words were not addressed to Julian. They were addressed to Denise. As the first course was poured and the room tried to pretend it was still a celebration, Denise realized Julian hadn't just found evidence, he was carrying a sealed message from Lionel that had never reached her, and whatever it contained was powerful enough to decide whether this night ends in repayment or destruction.